Welcome back to The Critique. Today we're looking at a piece that examines the friction and systemic pressure of Valentine's Day as a modern American ritual. Let's jump right in.
Okay. So this material has a really strong grasp on the history and the economics.
It does. And our first big piece of feedback is really about how to better use the global context that you've already put in the work to build.
Right, so we're talking about the comparisons here. The American model versus some of the Asian traditions, like role-reversed gifting in Taiwan or the mass weddings in the Philippines.
Exactly. You've documented that diversity so well. Things like Japan's Girichuko, the obligation chocolate, or South Korea's White Day.
And even Black Day for singles, which is fascinating.
It's all fantastic sociological data. But the analysis of American exclusion, it feels a little bit isolated from all that great context.
I see. So the pieces are there, but they aren't quite connecting to make the larger point.
Yes. So the critique should leverage the global variety of Valentine's traditions to really sharpen the analysis of American consumer culture's rigid focus on, a single coupled norm.
Okay, so the weakness isn't the data, it's the application.
Precisely. The analysis stops short of using this diversity as a critical foil. It focuses heavily on the American system, Hallmark, Esther Howland, De Beers, but it doesn't explicitly contrast that with the, let's call it, structural fluidity you see elsewhere.
And that misses a huge opportunity.
It does. It misses the chance to show how the standardized U.S. framework actively intensifies those feelings of exclusion.
Because the Asian examples you mentioned, they don't necessarily escape consumerism. Not at all.
No, they don't.
But they structure the emotional output very differently, right?
Absolutely. So our suggestion for improvement is to create a really clear contrast. On one side, the default U.S. system that centers the romantic couple, and on the other, cultures that, institutionalize broader affection or even singleness.
And doing that would show that the exclusion people feel in the U.S. isn't just a byproduct of capitalism.
It's a byproduct of systemic narrowness, a specific cultural prescription.
Okay, so how do we do that? How do we make that comparison without just listing facts?
Well, you could start by comparing the sheer visibility of the American romantic ritual. The grand gestures, the NRF's figure of $14.6 billion spent just on significant others, and put that right up against the rituals in Japan.
With Girichoko, the obligation chocolate, that's a great example.
It is, because normalizing that obligation gift, it fundamentally lowers the emotional stakes of the honmei chocolate, the true love chocolate.
So the U.S. system lacks that kind of cultural cushioning. The expectation is almost always honmei, true love, which puts just immense pressure on the intent of every single gift.
You've got it. The American system gives you very few structured ways to show non-romantic affection without it being, misinterpreted or compared to a romantic gesture.
And then there's South Korea.
Right. Use the existence of Black Day as a prime example of a system that actually acknowledges and ritualizes non-participation.
It's not just commiserating. It's a scheduled social structure for people who don't fit the norm on Valentine's Day or White Day.
Now compare that acknowledgement to the Reddit forum you cited.
Where singles are just framed as bitter single people.
Right. So the American system generates friction and isolation, while the other provides a recognized, structured social ritual.
The U.S. system basically makes the single person responsible for managing their own isolation.
It does. Whereas Black Day integrates that experience into the annual calendar. It's a profound difference in cultural responsibility.
That's a really sharp point.
And one last thing on this. You can discuss how the American system's expansion to include, friends, pets, co-workers.
Right. The NRF data shows 32% buy for friends.
That's a recent, almost clumsy adaptation to criticism. It's the system reacting.
Which is a crucial insight, because in many Asian traditions, family and friend affection was there from the start.
Exactly. The U.S. structure started from this hyper-rigid, couple-centric place and is only now sort of defensively trying to broaden out. It just proves how narrow the initial design was.
Okay, that reframes all that data into a really powerful critical tool.
It does. Now, let's pivot from that systemic narrowness to the psychological engine that forces people into that narrow lane.
This is about the psychological weight of the gifts, right? If the ritual is so stressful and expensive, why do people who say they hate it still participate?
That's the question.
The analysis of consumer behavior can be deepened by explicitly linking the financial cost of Valentine's Day to the psychological driver of indebtedness.
Indebtedness?
Yes, that's what explains why simply opting out feels so socially hazardous.
Okay.
Now, the material does a great job introducing signaling theory, the idea that inefficiency is currency, that effort proves emotion. You've got the spending figures, right? $27.5 billion overall.
I get the theory of costly signaling, but doesn't this feel a little cold? A little too transactional for romantic gifts?
How so?
Well, if we focus only on debt, are we removing the possibility of genuine gratitude or, altruism? I mean, are people really calculating social debt when they buy a gift?
That's a fair question. And the research suggests it's not that those positive emotions aren't there. They are. But they aren't the primary driver of the exchange.
I see.
And that's the weakness. The material doesn't quite integrate the psychological findings that distinguish between, say, gratitude or fondness, and the one emotion most predictive of gift-giving.
Which is indebtedness, the need for reciprocity.
Exactly. So it's not just I feel grateful, it's I feel obliged to discharge a perceived relational debt.
That's a subtle but really powerful shift. If I get a gift, I am now in debt, and that debt creates psychological pressure to reciprocate at, an equivalent level.
Precisely. Your own sources show that indebtedness uniquely predicts the willingness to give a thank you gift and the amount spent, even more than gratitude does.
So the need to discharge that debt is what drives participation, not just the simple expression of love.
Especially in these high-stakes rituals. If Valentine's Day is a performance of a healthy relationship,
Then failing to reciprocate or trying to opt out, it signals instability. It signals that you're failing to acknowledge the labor or the cost your partner incurred.
so the suggestion here is to reframe that pressure as a required performance of the norm of reciprocity. Emphasize that participation is often driven by obligation, even self-interest, the self-interest of maintaining the relationship.
And that's why doing nothing is so dangerous.
It is.
Okay, so how do we make that psychological shift visible in the piece without making the whole thing sound, cynical?
You can start by quoting the core idea from the gift research directly, that this seemingly altruistic act is often intertwined with a latent self-interest to maintain the relationship. That grounds the critique.
And then we have to tie this back to commercialization.
Right. Use signaling theory to show how this obligation is, in a way, financially manufactured. For a signal, the gift, to be credible, it has to have opportunity costs, time and money.
Like the De Beers standard, the 2-month salary.
Show how that intentionally heightens the cost. By making the signal more expensive, they strengthen the perception of commitment, but they also crank up the psychological pressure and the debt owed by the person receiving it.
It's a self-reinforcing loop. The financial cost validates the signal, which then reinforces the need for a reciprocal commitment.
And this brings us back to the social backlash.
Against the critics on Reddit?
Exactly. Analyze that perspective through this lens. People who dismiss Valentine's Day as capitalist are called bitter or anti-romantic.
But what's really happening?
The community is effectively accusing them of failing to honor the social contract of indebtedness. By attacking the commercial side of it, they're perceived as attacking the underlying relationship norm itself.
Wow. That moves the argument so far beyond just commercialism is bad, it gets into relational power dynamics.
It does.
And if people feel this deep obligation to signal their commitment, how did marketers find a way to make those signals measurable?
That is the perfect bridge to our final point.
The systemic creation of metrics.
So, the material should specifically analyze the historical development of Valentine's Day as the systemic creation of measurable key performance indicators, or KPIs, for romantic success.
And the historical data you've gathered is exceptionally strong here. You document the rise of mass production so well.
Esther Howland's assembly line for cards.
Selling up to $100,000 annually by 1880, which is just staggering.
Right, and then Cadbury's heart-shaped chocolates, and of course De Beers' engineering demand for diamonds. These are all excellent facts about commercial history. But the critique could be sharpened by framing them not just as product successes, but as the creation of tools. Tools designed to make a private emotion, love, publicly quantifiable and comparable.
So they're not just selling products, they're selling a standardized grading system for affection.
Exactly. And that shift from a personalized internal feeling to an external measurable KPI, that's what generates so much of the modern anxiety.
Because when love is quantified by the number of cards or the dollar spent, failure becomes so easy to evaluate against these known advertised standards.
The material should position Howland as the industrial pioneer of standardized emotional communication, and De Beers as the architect of the financial metric.
Okay, so what are some concrete examples we can use to really illustrate that transition from, unique sentiment to a public scorecard?
I would contrast the individualized, handwritten poems from the 1400s, a high-labor, totally unique expression, with Esther Howland's standardized approach.
With the pre-printed conventional verses.
Yes, and later she even published the New England Valentine Code's Valentine verse book, so buyers could just select and paste in the sentiment they felt was most suitable.
So that is the literal transition from unique, emotional labor to standardized, selectable utility. The anxiety shifts from, what beautiful thing can I write, to, did I choose the appropriate pre-printed message?
Precisely. The goal changes from original expression to standardized adherence. Now do the same thing with the jewelry spending.
The $6.5 billion?
Analyze that through the lens of De Beers' manufactured 2-month salary standard.
That benchmark shows how the holiday provides a socially enforced financial metric. A partner's commitment can now be judged against a publicly known advertised standard. It makes that commitment instantly visible and, crucially, comparable to others.
And finally, consider the sociological implication of expanding this system to family and friends. The $4.3 billion spent on family gifts.
It means the ritual enforces visibility and measurement across all social ties, not just romantic ones.
Which increases the total pressure and the emotional labor for everyone.
It's not just your romantic scorecard anymore. It's your friend's scorecard, your family scorecard. The metrics they permeate your entire social world.
It's a fantastic structural arc for the piece. You move from identifying the systemic narrowness to explaining the deep psychological mechanics of indebtedness, and finally to examining the quantifiable metrics created to measure success or failure within this mandatory ritual.
Yeah, the material really does a good job exploring Valentine's Day through these lenses of history, economics, and ritual. It shows its unique power to generate stress right alongside joy.
And the suggestions we've offered really just focus on leveraging the detailed data you already have to articulate precisely how the American system creates that exclusion and pressure.
So, to recap, use the systemic contrasts, make traditions like Black Day a structural mirror for American narrowness.
Right. And then deepen the psychological argument by emphasizing the role of indebtedness and the measurable performance indicators engineered by marketers like Howland and De Beers.
It's a really powerful analysis of how modern culture turns a private emotion into a public ritual.
And how those rituals shape our behavior in ways that are often invisible until you really stop and examine them.
A great piece of work.
We invite the listener to refine the analysis by incorporating these systemic contrasts and psychological drivers and submit the resulting asset back to us for further critique. Until next time.